What's going on, everybody? It's Ty, and today I wanted to break down my top 5 characters from the Netflix original series BoJack Horseman. BoJack Horseman is like a tragic comedy, so it's extremely funny but also extremely sad at the same time. The quality of the writing and the complexity of its characters is what makes this show so good and allows it to pull off that complicated formula, and it's also what's made it so hard for me to talk about it in an intelligent way since I've finished watching it. It probably is my second favorite show of all time, but I haven't made any long videos on it until now because it's just so good and I want to say the right things about it. But I'm giving it a shot today, and before I get into my top 5, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for hopefully more BoJack content in the near future and for content on other TV shows and movies. So at number 5, I have Todd Chavez, voiced by one of my favorite actors, Aaron Paul. Todd is a fun character, kind of one of the more lighthearted characters in the show, but he still is kind of a lost soul searching for his purpose in life, just like a lot of the other characters in the show that touch on a little bit deeper internal conflicts. But his struggles are definitely still real. It just seems like he's able to handle it with a little more grace and a little more optimism in his daily life. From weird opera groups to asexual date nights, Todd is always getting himself involved in something that you wouldn't expect. Now, of course, BoJack is the face of the show, so I want to cover how all these characters relate to BoJack. And for BoJack, even though Todd wasn't really the smartest or wisest person, he probably has the lowest intelligence of any of these characters. He was still a voice of reason for BoJack in so many scenarios, and I think that was really important for BoJack, even though unfortunately BoJack really never listened to him. But in certain situations where BoJack needed a wake-up call, a kick in the butt, Todd would provide that for him. And, if BoJack would have taken some of Todd's rather simple but, effective and correct statements to heart, he might have wound up in a different spot by the end of the show. So I love Todd, but he is at number 5 because all 5 of the main characters in the show are just so good. And that leads me to number 4, which is Princess Carolyn. Princess Carolyn is what you'd call a workaholic. She centers her daily life activities and all of her focus on work. And as we uncover throughout the show, it seems like she's trying to hide and or run away from a lot of her problems by enveloping herself in her work, in the world that is, her workplace, and taking care of all her clients, and, acting like she's too busy to deal with some of her internal struggles. Using work as a coping mechanism to avoid having these difficult conversations or, doing difficult things to resolve these conflicts is, of course, unhealthy, and that's the route that she goes, and it's highlighted for her. But all of these characters seem to have an unhealthy way of dealing with, their depression or what they think their shortcomings are within themselves. One of the things that also drags Princess Carolyn down throughout the show is her relationship with BoJack. They have both a friendly and a romantic type relationship on and off throughout the show, but in some way or another, they also have a professional relationship because she's his agent, but in some way or another, they're always connected to each other, and it seems like she can't find true happiness and move forward to have the life she's always wanted until she kind of leaves BoJack in the dust, unfortunately. Because no matter how much we love him and sympathize with him as viewers, BoJack does seem to drag the people around him down and bring out the worst in them. Princess Carolyn finds herself at 4 on my list just because I didn't find her personality or her journey to be quite as touching and moving as my top 3 characters, but she was certainly really good. Had a lot of really funny conversations with her clients. She would do this thing where she'd use like rhymes and alliteration, and I wish I could read out an example, but it would probably take up like a whole minute of the video. But if you've seen BoJack, you know what I'm talking about. She's like, the tor de scorps and the borps the dorp. She like rhymes a bunch of things together. It's really funny. And I also really liked her relationship with the mouse in this show, and I thought their journey of, trying to get pregnant together and then eventually the relationship just not working out and them breaking up, I thought that was a sad thing because I thought they actually really went well together, but she just couldn't handle being in that situation with him. And then once again, she turns to work, to kind of drown her problems out. So that was kind of the motto for her. Number 3 and number 2 were really close for me, but at number 3 I decided to go with Mr. Peanut Butter. A lot of the role Mr. Peanut Butter plays in the show, I think, is to be a stark contrast from BoJack Horseman in terms of how they deal with their problems. Whereas BoJack seems to be in a constant self-loathing, depressive state, Mr. Peanut Butter is actually like an ever-optimist and, an upbeat person that tries to see the best in people and the best in everything in life, really. This relentless optimism and positivity is what carries him through his day-to-day life, and it also has some negative effects, I believe, on his relationship with Diane as the show goes further and further along. He seems to struggle relating to how other people deal with their struggles. Diane would sit around for days at a time and be depressed, and she'd want to talk about sad things. And, Mr. Peanut Butter would kind of want to get lost in the glitz and glamour of life and, just keep plugging along, doing his funny comedy shows and whatever the case may be. He kind of tried to just block the stuff out and act like everything was A-okay, and he was just going to walk through life with a smile on his face, no matter how depressing his outlook on life may be. And, if you casually watch the show, you might not even notice that he is almost just as depressed as a lot of the other characters in the show, or that he has such deep struggles as well. But, if you see certain moments, certain episodes, they really hint at deep character struggles for Mr. Peanut Butter. One of the things he says to Diane, which is one of the darkest things said in the show, and it's especially dark coming from the most positive and upbeat character in the show, is when he says, "The key to being happy isn't the search for meaning. It's just to keep yourself busy with unimportant nonsense, and eventually you'll be dead." And he says it like so softly to her too. It's just, when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, this show is crazy. I mean, it was one thing following BoJack and seeing how, the struggles he's going through, it's gut-wrenching as a viewer. But then you see a character like Mr. Peanut Butter, you think he loves life, you think he's just so happy, and then he pulls out a quote like this, and you go, what the heck is going on? So I really think it's just highlighting that everybody has their struggles, and everybody has a different way of dealing with it, and, basically don't read a book by its cover. And I do think Mr. Peanut Butter was generally happier than a lot of the other characters in the show, and that, a lot of the times trying to block out those things and just enjoying his day-to-day life and going with the flow, taking advantage of a lot of the crazy, wacky opportunities he gets, that was all fine and well for him a lot of the time, but when push came to shove, when a difficult situation arose, he would kind of lose it sometimes because, he was trying to hold it all together with his smile, and then, when something really bad happens, it brings out all that stuff he's trying to hide, and it makes it even worse. So I found that dichotomy, that compare and contrast between BoJack and Mr. Peanut Butter to be really effective, and, just mirroring how one deals with their problems compared to another. But they're both depressed, they're both kind of lost with their place in the world, both searching for a purpose, but they just have different ways of going about it. Another great Mr. Peanut Butter quote was, "Are my self-destructive patterns and unexamined cycles of codependency the popular Jim Carrey character The Mask? Because somebody stopped me." He just had such great one-liners, such witty comments throughout the show, was an extremely funny character as well. And don't get me wrong, 90% of the time he was fun, he was funny, you couldn't tell anything was wrong with him, he didn't have a care in the world. But I just think it makes it all the more sad in the moments where he does say things like I've mentioned here, and there's a bunch of quotes like that. It's really poignant, and it makes Mr. Peanut Butter one of my favorite characters in the show. It was hard to not put him at number 2. But at number 2, I have Diane, Mr. Peanut Butter's wife for much of the show. Diane is also a really good friend to BoJack throughout most of the show. They meet because she is writing a memoir about his life to try to, kind of revive his life, and he thinks it's going to, build up his public image again to maybe give him a new opportunity, but she kind of writes more of the raw things about his character that she realizes from spending some time around him and learning about his childhood. BoJack, of course, doesn't like this, but he also seems drawn to Diane from the very start because she seems to see him in a different light than anyone else ever has, and to actually care about him, care about what he thinks and feels and what he's been through. He grew up in a household where his parents really didn't care about him at all, as we see even more later on in the show. And, everyone else in his life he feels like has probably just used him for his money, his fame. But Diane seems to actually care and want to know about him on a personal level. And so that made their relationship and that pairing really important throughout the entire show. And, it's a situation where I thought they'd always get together as a couple. But, looking back on it, I think it was appropriate for them not to. Just like Princess Carolyn had to distance herself from BoJack to have a happy life, I think that was one of the first steps for Diane is, okay, BoJack has unfortunately drugged me into a lot of his crap, and I do care about him, but I need to prioritize my own happiness, and that's something that Diane was searching for the entire show as well. Also, much like Princess Carolyn, I think Diane became very invested in her career because she saw it as a path to increase her self-worth. You know, if she was one of the best writers, if she wrote a killer story, it would really make her feel a lot better about herself. Whereas, you know, in times where she was struggling to even write a page, as we see when she's depressed in, you know, late season 5 or season 6, when her and BoJack are, you know, nowhere close after her divorce with Mr. Peanut Butter, you know, when she's struggling to write these things, you know, she gets super depressed and, you know, she feels like she's worth nothing because that's what she feels like she can contribute to the world. And so that's really sad. It's also sad that, you know, she had certain figures that she looked up to. You know, she went across the world to try to help these people, and then she realizes that the guy there was literally doing it all for clout and all for the image. He didn't actually care about these poor people suffering overseas. And once again, her journey throughout the 6 seasons was just so interesting to follow as she took her own personal path on her soul search, you know, trying to find her meaning, her purpose, her place in the universe, the people she wanted to surround herself with. And I always thought the pairing with her and Mr. Peanut Butter was a little odd, but, you know, I realized that it was probably to highlight their difference in personality, and that, you know, Diane had such a different way of dealing with things. Mr. Peanut Butter really couldn't connect or understand with, you know, her self-loathing, you know, her staying inside for days, her being depressed, you know, her not being okay with some of the crazy things he did. They just had a really interesting relationship, and I think it also highlights that love isn't cookie cutter. It can look a lot of different ways, and they genuinely did seem to love each other for a lot of time, but in the end it just didn't work out. But Diane and what she meant to BoJack and Mr. Peanut Butter, as well as diving into her own psyche, was one of the most interesting parts of this show and why I had to rank her so high. And I really found her conversation at the end of the show with BoJack to be quite fitting too. Super well-written character. I loved her. She's number 2 on my list. And at number 1, I have BoJack Horseman, to no surprise. And, you know, I don't even feel like I have the knowledge and the prowess to explain his character in full to you guys, but I'll just brush over it a little bit. BoJack, without exaggeration, is probably my favorite character of all time in any fictional circumstance, you know, books, movies, TV shows. I think he's like the best written character that I've ever seen. He's, of course, as anti-hero as an anti-hero can get. He has super questionable morals. He makes a lot of bad decisions. He's so imperfect, but he's still the protagonist of the show, and you still want to root for him most of the time. At least I found myself feeling that way. You know, he makes so many questionable decisions with the 17-year-old in Santa Fe. You know, of course, his relationship with Sarah Lynn, his abusive relationship with you know, one of his castmates turned lovers in season 5. You know, his relationship with drugs and alcohol, the way he treats you know, Hollyhock in some circumstances, the way he treats Todd, his roommate, and just drags people down around him in general. He really is a train wreck of a person, and that makes you want him to succeed and to get out of that rut all the more in the end, I think. And it's just so tragic following his story, his desire for happiness and just never being able to reach that. It's something that as a viewer I always wanted for him, and, you know, I'm kind of glad that in the end, though, he did have to pay for his consequences. You know, there was no cop-out that, okay, he gets with Diane, you know, he gets exactly what he wanted. You know, throughout the show, there were people that were able to get in his ear and say, look, you can still do this. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take you being able to, you know, try to be a better person every day. Actually take action every single day and be a better person. Do these things to improve the way you live, to improve the way you treat people. And, you know, he would show glimpses of being able to do it, of trying to correct his actions and his mentality, but ultimately he was never able to show that consistency to be a better person. And I'm just going to read a couple of my favorite quotes from BoJack, just so you can see, you know, the type of internal thoughts he had that were so dang sad. He says to one of his girlfriends in the show, same thing that always happens. You didn't know me, and then you fell in love with me, and now you know me. So basically saying, you didn't know me, so you were able to fall in love with me, but once you got to know me, you no longer loved me because you saw the ugly. This one is more funny, but it's still, like, extremely sad, obviously. He says, I need to go take a shower, so I can't tell if I'm crying or not. And this one is really hard-hitting, I think. He says, one day you're going to look around and you're going to realize that everybody loves you, but nobody likes you. And that is the loneliest feeling in the world. And I think that kind of sums up BoJack's character, at least in some regards. But like I said, he's just such a complex character. There's so much that goes into his struggles. You know, a lot of it stems from his environment. You know, growing up with parents that were really just awful people. Didn't take good care of him, didn't give him any wisdom really to take through life. Really just kind of put him down and made him feel like a piece of dirt from the start. And then, habits that he develops once he's older and, the Hollywood lifestyle getting to him, all of these elements culminating together really just were a recipe for disaster. So yeah, I mean, BoJack is probably just the most heartbreaking character I've ever come across, and also one of the funniest characters ever. And, the fact that they could make that work, pulling such sad topics, but also, creating that levity with super funny moments within this really quirky universe makes the show one of my favorites ever, if not my favorite, and makes BoJack my favorite fictional character of all time. I might do a video in the future where I dive even further into his character, but I'd probably, want to have that like typed out like an essay, just because, it's so complex, the writing for his character, and I really connect with it. I think it's the best thing I've really ever consumed. So that's why I have BoJack at number 1. So to review, the list is number 5, Todd, number 4, Princess Carolyn, number 3, Mr. Peanut Butter, number 2, Diane, and number 1, BoJack Horseman himself. I considered including other characters like Hollyhock. She was probably my favorite character outside of like the 5 main characters that we really followed almost each and every episode. But ultimately, I just wanted to stick to these 5 main characters because, they're the ones that we had consistently throughout the entirety of the show. I think Hollyhock was in like 3 seasons, and her relationship with BoJack, I think, was really important for him and part of what tried to sway him in the right direction, even though he ultimately still couldn't be the person that he needed to be in the end, and, his demons caught up to him. But I think she was really important, and there were other characters throughout the show that I really enjoyed as well, but that's my order for the main 5, and they'd probably be my top 5 anyway. So the Yap Fest is over. I hope you enjoyed my top 5 BoJack Horseman characters. Once again, like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'm going to have a lot more TV and movie content coming up in the near future, so stay tuned for that. As always, thank you for watching. This is Ty the TV Guy. I'll see you next time.